Anger erupting among Chinese homebuyers as property developers hold construction on their homes.
这种希望破灭的那种感觉，就有点万念俱灰了。
Many now refuse to make mortgage payments.
The authorities took a very serious view of this because the consequences, if this were to spread, were pretty dire.
As a decades-long property boom in China draws to a close,
real estate is the single most important sector in the Chinese economy.
who will end up holding the bag?
Prices cannot go up forever. It will always be painful when they come down.
原来我们小时候经常就几个小伙伴呢，就到跑到这后山来玩，水里面抓鱼啊，山上就摘野果子吃。现在基本上这里全部都变了样，只有这一点点就是我们儿时的记忆。 就是这一点点，还保持原来的模样。
It's been called the biggest migration in human history. In the past 40 years, hundreds of millions of Chinese farmers left the land their ancestors worked on for generations to look for jobs in cities. Some dreamt of returning to the countryside to retire. But as the urban population expanded, growing cities encroached into rural land.
没政策之前，这个厂这条路就直通通的我们家后面，那个厂原来那个厂就是我们家那个地方。
When China embarked on reforms to remake its economy in 1978, only 18% of its citizens lived in cities. Today, it boasts an urbanization rate of 64%. More than 900 million Chinese citizens now live in cities and towns. Around the time Tian's wife got pregnant in 2018, the family decided to take the plunge. They took out a mortgage to buy an apartment in Shangtan, a fourth-tier city in the central province of Hunan. He had expected to move into his new family home within 2 years. But 4 years later, with a 3-year-old boy in tow, Tian visits his unfinished apartment by climbing stairs in the dark in this gigantic riverside project.
看楼好高啊，这里高不高？啊，高不高？
别掉下去了！
啊，不能掉下去的。你怕，我也怕。喜不喜欢这里？ 喜欢。像现在还一直没交房，我们建河呢，本来是2020年8月30号交房的，本来是，现在是22年，已经快已经8月份了，快2年了已经。给首付是我父母抽一点，再然后借的外面亲戚朋友借了一点，但我自己还有一点，就是抽了个首付，这样交过来的，然后在银行贷款贷了40万。 房贷是多少呢？一个月月供？我们一个月2800。
The financial burden was manageable until COVID struck, and like many migrant workers, Tian lost his job in a chemical factory.
我失业大概有大半年了，经济压力还是比较大，因为现在就我老婆一个人上班，4000多块钱一个月是这样子，反正还了房贷也是手上也没几个钱了，真的。
Tian is not alone in this limbo. According to estimates by Bank of America, close to 9% of housing projects under construction across China have become so-called 烂尾楼 or rotten tail buildings, a name for unfinished housing projects. An estimated 2.4 million families can't move into the homes they paid for, affecting a total of 7.3 million people. Together with the other homeowners in the same development, Tian sent a letter to his bank in July threatening to stop mortgage payments if construction doesn't resume by September. He sees this as its last resort.
跟政府交涉过，开发商交涉过，反正都没有很明确的答复，就是说像踢皮球一样，这里踢一下，那里踢一下，我心里真的没点底。房子交下来，房子也看不到点希望，真的看不到一点希望都看不到。
In making the threat to the bank, Tian is again joined by many others. Since July, homebuyers in over 100 cities across China have declared a mortgage boycott. Just like Tian, many homebuyers are desperate. Some have taken to street demonstrations, but these have been quickly quashed, with officials citing COVID concerns.
咱们在这儿集聚，最终是解决不了问题的，而且还有防疫的要求。如果今天哪个搞一个红码呀、黄码呀，中间再有一些疫情的集聚，造成更多的扩散。 那就更不是咱们能够解决问题。
Backed into a corner, homebuyers have threatened to stop payments on their mortgage in over 300 projects.
If it's just a few individuals, right, they would be punished. But because it was so widespread, so you know what we call collective action problem, right? And then I think it got the authorities concerned and added to the urgency of the problem. If the mortgage boycotts were to spread, what it means is non-performing loans go up. Banks may hold back on issuing more loans. So the rest of the economy might seize up as well.
Since the boycott first emerged, China has cut mortgage interest rates and pledged to support project completion. But until that happens, the home buyers are still bearing the financial strain. Fearing retaliation, most home buyers only agreed to speak to us anonymously. In early July, a slew of them shared their mortgage boycott plans on Chinese social media sites. The authorities quickly moved to restrict such posts. Since mid-July, there has been almost no more public posts threatening mortgage boycotts, but the underlying issues remain. According to rating agency S&P, 40% of Chinese developers are now in so-called financial distress, and they've stopped work on 20% of their projects so far. Things could still get worse. The agency says potentially half the projects under these developers can go rotten tail. But how did China come to have a housing market so vast and so risky? Its evolution can be traced back to the early post-Mao era. Until 1979, homes couldn't be bought or sold in the People's Republic of China. That year, most of the country's relatively small urban population lived in cramped housing quarters provided by the government. But things started to change in the next decade.
It started around the 1980s, along with the opening up policy in China, initiated by our leader Deng Xiaoping at the time. So along with the growth of the economy, the China's housing market also experienced a significant level of privatization.
Chinese citizens, for the first time in decades, were allowed to own real estate. Construction boomed. Between 1979 and 2021, China built 23 billion square meters of housing. The amount of floor space an average Chinese urban resident occupies grew from just 7 square meters, more than 5-fold, to 36 square meters, on par with the developed world's average. Private developers came to dominate the market.
The total public housing in China is about 11%, including about 7%, which is the government-sponsored low-rent housing, as well as the subsidized economical housing, which is 4%. It's actually quite small if you compare across other countries.
Singapore especially, right, with more than 80% of the housing stock being public housing. Even Hong Kong, which is supposedly this paragon of free market capitalism, also about 50%, right, of housing stock is public now, I think, in China. I think new housing stock, hardly any of it is public.
By mid-1990s, banks started offering 20-year mortgages, allowing home buyers to bring forward the purchase they couldn't afford with savings alone. At the same time, China introduced a drastic pre-sale system, whereas in countries such as the UK, mortgage payments only start after key collection. In China, repayments start much earlier. Upon signing a contract, a home buyer would pay a 40% down payment and take out a bank loan to cover the rest. The bank would start paying the developer right away, and the home buyer would need to service the mortgage, sometimes before a single brick is laid.
So without pre-sale, the real estate developers have to build the houses using their own funding, using their own money, own capital, right? If they have the pre-sale system, they can ease their financing burden by attracting capital even before the property completion. So I think it's quite beneficial for the developers.
The whole construction period would take about 2 to 3 years usually, and people will start paying their mortgage way before the completion of the project.
We're talking about months or years?
Years, even years, maybe over a year and a half. In the past, it wasn't seen as a risky business because, as I said, and people would not expect developers cannot complete their home at a large scale, not like now.
But just how did so many Chinese developers hold construction at the same time? More than 40 years after China introduced private housing, the country's real estate market has gone through a stark transformation. Aided by a growing urban population and a booming economy, the property sector soared. According to The Economist, China builds about 15 million homes a year, 5 times that of America and Europe combined. Chinese developers became behemoths. Among the largest, China Evergrande. Founded in 1997 in Guangzhou by colorful tycoon Xu Jiayin. He was a latecomer to China's real estate bonanza, but quickly grew into its second biggest and possibly most reckless player.
When you receive proceeds from a project that is still in the early stage of the construction, and then you invest in some other project, and you also receive proceeds from this project, and you invest in another project, so you can see that you can grow your size pretty quickly in a short time. Many developers have been relying on that like fast churn development model, and I would say an extreme example would be Evergrande.
At its peak, Evergrande had more than 1,300 projects across China. A total of 12 million families lived in homes it built. And for future expansion, it amassed a land bank bigger than the island of Manhattan. The humongous scale is precisely what gave homebuyers like Chang confidence.
其实当时买恒大城的时候，这块都没来，就是觉得盘子大，这个想法很单纯，很简单，而且呢有实力，大企业。
Investors worry the indebted property group will default and that the spillover will destabilize an economy that is already under strain.
In late 2021, Evergrande became the first major Chinese developer to default on its debts. The company has since disclosed that it owes banks, bondholders, and suppliers $300 billion in total, the equivalent of 2% of the Chinese GDP.
其实刚开始知道的时候呢，知道这个恒大出事情的时候，其实呢，我是，不是说特别的担心。我想着这个事情它牵扯的是千家万户，它不单单是我们这一个楼盘，还有全国各地这个大大小小的恒大楼盘多了去了。
What comes as a surprise from the end consumer's point of view was that, when there's a national name, there's a sense that there's too big to fail. So when the borrowings market or the sort of refinancing market sort of stops, you have a shortage of cash coming in, but at the same time, the construction commitments remain quite elevated. So there's a cash shortfall.
Cut off from capital, Evergrande was unable to borrow enough to pay interest on its old debts, let alone complete unfinished projects. But why did capital markets turn on Evergrande?
That kind of too big to fail status, and that becomes increasingly uncomfortable potentially with the authorities, because you have an issue that very levered companies, if they are really go under, or if they have liquidity issues, they need to be bailed out by the government, which is not very keen.
At the same time, the authorities also realize high property prices have come at a huge cost. Unable to afford a home, more and more young people opt not to get married or have children.
There's probably been a debate in Beijing for many years about how to stop it. And finally, in the last couple of years, they said, we just cannot let it continue rising. At this point, we have to stop it. So it probably came a little late, but I think they didn't have much of a choice.
At first, the authorities tried to stem rising property prices with purchase restrictions. When that didn't work, in early 2021, China came out with 3 red lines. This was aimed at prohibiting highly indebted developers from borrowing more. Evergrande breached all 3 red lines. When it couldn't borrow, it failed to make interest payments on its debts by mid-2021. Many of its projects turned rotten tail.
The crisis is a long time in the making, but the trigger was actually government policy, right? The 3 red lines, which was well-intentioned, by the way. It was well-intentioned in the sense that the authorities wanted to reduce leverage. I mean, the property developers were indeed over-leveraged, and they wanted to curb housing speculation. But just because a policy is well-intentioned doesn't mean it is well-designed or well-implemented.
In Henan, Chang is trying to contend with its newfound reality.
合同约定呢是7月31号，就是2022年的7月31号，要交房的，现在就没交啊，也交不了啊那个房子，因为它现在还属于一个不能交付的一个状态。房贷的话，一个月是8300多。那个因为疫情呢，今年已经是第3年了嘛，对工作的影响肯定是很大的。 所以这2年其实也是还是很艰难的。这2年。
Evergrande might have been the first to fall, but it sparked a fire that began to spread.
When one company starting to go over, which the market did not expect it to, then you have a confidence crisis in the remaining companies, and then you have a knock-on impact, and customers starting to really question some of these names that they never thought would go under as well, stop buying from private developers, and that created a confidence crisis.
Back in Hunan, to put pressure on the developer and the local government, Tian and several of his fellow homebuyers have moved into the unfinished apartment blocks. At night, they swap stories and create short videos for Douyin, the Chinese version of TikTok, to generate buzz and gain sympathy.
有没有找女朋友啊？
之前倒是有，后面也怀了，也谈到要结婚了。女方父母说这个房子也没有，是吧？烂尾楼不算房，是吧？不让结，啊，现在也散了，小孩也打了。
As a result of the one-child policy and the Chinese preferring male heirs, there are 35 million more men than women in China. That creates intense competition for brides, with men often having to prove their material worth to their prospective in-laws, a dynamic dubbed 丈母娘经济, the mother-in-law economy. This often means owning a home.
不烂这个尾的话，我现在应该是已经结婚了，对吧？准备明年当爸爸了。后面呢，就是流掉了以后，感觉这个信念就崩塌了，整个世界都感觉都像崩塌了一样，就有点万念俱灰了，所以也没办法。
Li is the man in the Douyin video. The 34-year-old gig worker surprisingly understands his would-be in-laws' actions.
这现在整个中国来讲，就没有这套房子，你想娶个老婆，太难了。那是你真的是祖坟冒青烟，啊，那都是浇不灭的那种青烟，你可能会娶到一个，对不对？ 你像普通的，像我们这种正常的普通的，你想娶到，你起码得最基本的这套房子得有，啊，要不谁愿意嫁给你啊？就算别人愿意嫁给你，你敢娶她吗？你不觉得对不起她吗？
Li spent years working in Shanghai, but grew tired of the ultra-competitive environment in China's first-tier cities. That was why he wanted to settle down in Hunan, where the pace of life is slower and homes cheaper.
首付付了有20，就加上税，7、8、20出头，然后贷款是贷了有50多，月供不高，月供才2000多，不到3000，因为买的小，面积小，就是。 住家性质的嘛，之前的话，我还在上海的时候，大概在收入比例的10%到15%吧，啊，那个时候收入会高一些，然后，因为也是想着看到这个房子快交了，然后就回长沙这边来发展，啊，现在的话占比例差不多能占到35%了。 住这里怎么说呢？也不方便。我现在住这边，我每天上厕所我得跑到那边去上。晚上上个厕所得跑，来回得差不多有1里路了都，有吧？啊。洗澡就在那个池里头洗。
While making do in an apartment with no electricity or running water, Li and his neighbors wonder where the blame lay.
监管资金出问题了，不是那个的话，我们这楼卖那么好，怎么可能会烂掉？
就是开发商把这个钱挪到其他楼盘去了，然后其他楼盘去继续拿地。
For Li and his neighbors, it's puzzling that construction has been halted while they're still making their mortgage payments. These funds should have been set aside for the building project, but that doesn't always happen.
Once the funds from the buyers comes in, it should be in the escrow accounts, in the independent third-party escrow accounts, which is overseen or regulated by some trustee. Yeah, but in China, they either lack of this system or they don't follow the steps, procedures strictly. The money comes into the accounts for project A, but the developers may use the money on project B. At the end of the day, project A does not have enough funds to keep its construction into completion.
In China, 50 to 70% of pre-sale proceeds are supposed to be held in escrow accounts, and misuse of escrow is illegal. But in a clip that went viral online, a bank official in Henan admitted to protesting homebuyers that the money in their escrow account was misappropriated, but then pointed finger at a local government department for giving the bank instructions to do so. The government later denied the allegation. But are greedy developers the only ones to blame?
Bubbles are systemic. We always blame them on greed and on Ponzi schemes and on fraud, and there's plenty of greed and plenty of fraud. But the problem is you lock yourself into a system of rising prices.
In the 40-plus years since China privatized housing, the country's real estate market grew to a scale never seen before.
The Chinese economy is officially about 3/4 the size of the US economy or the European economy. So in theory, if American real estate were correctly valued, Chinese real estate should be about 3/4 the value of American real estate. And yet, Chinese real estate is worth more than twice American real estate and more than 3 times European real estate. And that makes no sense at all. That's logically impossible to explain.
Michael Pattis is an American professor who teaches finance at Peking University. He's been living in the Chinese capital for more than 20 years.
For many years, it was well known that the way to get rich in China was to borrow as much money as you could possibly borrow and buy as much real estate as you could possibly buy. And as a result, that's what people did. The problem with that system is that it can't go up forever. For the last 10 years, I've been telling my friends not to buy.
Wouldn't they be mad at you?
Oh, yeah. Until this year, they would have been very angry.
In the past 10 years, average home prices more than doubled in Beijing, rose 150% in Shanghai, and almost quadrupled in the southern city of Shenzhen. It is estimated that up to 70% of household wealth in China is tied up in property. It was once said that property speculation was China's national sport, just as Tu Qiang, a real estate agent in Yanzhou, a town situated geographically in Hebei province.
向北大概1公里不到，开车5分钟以内就有京平高速。
Because of its proximity to Beijing, it became a popular choice to buy a home for workers who can't afford the prices in a capital.
燕郊最好的时候应该是在15年的下半年到16年，持续到年底的这一段期间，相当于是房地产市场，然后在持续不断的上升，几乎就是每天对于新房来讲就是一天一个价格。啊，最好的时候呢，就相当于是你比如今天是卖到1万，有可能明天就变到1万2，就是涨幅特别严重。当时我们房地产工作人员的工资很低，一般赚的都是提成。 你不知道你得卖到10多套房才赚个几万块钱，其实特别的少，特别的辛苦。然后呢，也是感觉这个市场要起来了，因为毕竟我是从事这一行的，也是有一定的体会。咬牙，搁朋友那儿倒了一部分钱，先投资了这第1套房子。随着这个市场的不断晋升，我就感觉我赚的突然之间越来越多。在房地产这边的话，赚到的钱，我也不了解其他的行业，再继续投资房子。20刚出头的时候，有个3、2套房，有车有存款，我自我会感觉良好，但是呢，并不满足。随着市场的不断晋升，我也有点像是投投红了眼。在高价的时候呢，又再购进了一些高价的房。
Between 2015 and 2017, home prices in Yanjiao tripled. Alarmed by the rapid rise, the local government implemented purchase curbs, allowing only people with hukou or local household registration to buy, ruling out the Beijing commuters.
当限购政策出来了以后，不到1个月的时间，其实燕郊的这个地方呢，接近屯展，相当于是已经掉价掉到了原来价值的2/3，只留有1/3，差不多这个样子。
To add to the pain, in 2020, COVID struck. Beijing, as the Chinese capital, essentially sealed its borders with neighboring provinces, making it impossible for workers to commute from Yanjiao. Now, even the rental market evaporated.
你当时你有多么风光，你摔下来你就有多么的惨。在自己最苦的时候，没有钱吃饭，睡公园，当时非常的害怕，非常的担心，不知道该如何是好。年纪小，又赔了这么多钱，我也突然感觉昏天暗地的。每天睁开眼睛，就是如何去还这笔账。
According to a survey by Chinese research firm Boycott, the city of Langfang, where Yanjiao belongs, has one of the highest vacancy rates in a country. Close to 20% of the apartments already built stand empty. On average, the report says 12% of China's existing homes have no one to live in.
The famous story in China that people were buying apartments for their sons at the age of 18 or 19 when nobody needs an apartment because the son had to have an apartment if he was going to get married, so they would buy it now. That looks like preparing for the future, but from a market point of view, that is speculative buying. I'm buying not because I need it, but because I think the price will go up. Prices cannot go up forever, and they will never come down in a nice, gentle way. It will always be painful when they come down.
To be sure, the massive fall in Yanjiao's home prices is rather unique. But nationwide home prices have also started to decline. S&P is now forecasting a 6 to 7% drop in prices for the year.
The investment demand probably is gone. So that's why we are forecasting property sales this year in 2022 and likely in 2023 will be about 12 to 13 trillion RMB versus 18 trillion in 2021.
With a supply glut and falling demand, developers now have far less ability to raise capital from pre-sales, adding to their financial woes.
Ultimately, the total value of residential real estate to GDP is typically around 100%. In the US right now, it's about 120%, so that's very high. In China, it's about 350%. Which suggests it has a long ways to go down before it becomes normal.
So can anything be done to stop the collapse? China is the world's second largest economy, and up to 30% of its GDP comes from construction and related industries. After a 40-year boom, things have come to a sudden stop. Property developers are going bankrupt, homes stand unfinished, and housing prices are dropping across the country. Some people are worried that this will trigger something similar to the 2008 global financial crisis, which started when a mortgage meltdown in the US destroyed American investment bank Lehman Brothers.
I think that's where many people got it wrong. So people said a real estate crisis in the US must look a lot like a real estate crisis in China. But it really doesn't, because the Chinese financial system is very different. In China, we won't have a crisis. We'll have a very long, slow adjustment rather than a very quick, brutal adjustment.
There's no clear-cut bankruptcy laws in China. You know, it's very hard for individuals or households to walk away from debt.
Unlike the global financial crisis, where American subprime mortgages or low-quality mortgages have been spread throughout not just America's financial system, but throughout the global financial system through this process we call securitization. The good thing, or the silver lining in China's property debt crisis, is that that hasn't happened. Right? So most of the debt, of the distressed debt, are in Chinese institutions. So this has much less risk of a financial contagion to the rest of the world.
As the real estate sector goes into a deep winter, the chilling effect has spread to other industries. Here in China's largest ceramics wholesale market, buyers are few and far in between.
疫情啊，房地產又唔好，又得難做啊。咁啊，陣間做10萬嗰啲1萬都冇，戶租難交啊。
The city of Foshan in Guangdong province is China's production center for ceramic tiles, a popular flooring material used by developers. In the first half of 2022, the industry operated at half capacity.
这个房地产的暴雷一直延续到今年，暴雷不断啊。那么房地产的这个整个市场的一个萎缩啊，所以呢，我们与房地产息息相关的一个建筑陶瓷行业，那么我们也预感到增量时代已经一去不复返了，我们已经进入了一个存量甚至缩量的一个时代。
Mona Lisa is one of the market leaders in the industry. In the first 6 months of the year, it reported a net loss of $70 million after writing down close to $100 million to account for products already sold to developers, which it does not expect to get paid for.
成也房地产，败也房地产。基于我们所处的一个产能过剩的行业，所以呢，房地产提出任何的条件，我们都无条件去接受。 这样的话就带来我们很多的隐患，房地产一暴雷，然后我们就感觉到这个应收账款的压力，整个订单呢，萎缩下来，那么带来的压力也是蛮大的。
To make things worse, many suppliers essentially lend money to developers.
首先获得订单是最重要的。 那么甚至呢，有的是以这种投入多少基金来换取这个订单，也埋下了一个又一个的雷，导致我们整个大家居，作为房地产的材料供应商，因此就陷入其中，苦不堪言。据我了解，我们的同行，可能1、2家的话呢，投入到某一个房地产的这个资金，可能就好几十个亿。 那么能不能收回，也是一个大大的问号。那么我们整个行业据不完全统计，可能都有100、200个亿。
I think many of us underestimated how extensive these liabilities were. Turns out the property developers owed a whole range of people money, right? They owe trust companies money they rely on trust companies for financing to purchase land. They owe their customers money because of this practice of pre-sales. They owe their suppliers money in the form of these commercial paper. So I think what we underestimated was how intricately interwoven and interconnected these Chinese property developers were with the rest of the economy.
If there aren't more nasty surprises, this will be one of the most surprising economic events in history. Right? We don't know, but it's really, really likely that we're going to see a rise in insolvencies for all of the structural reasons that have happened in the past.
Back in Hunan, Li is trying to move on. He's recently found a small shop front to start a service linking cleaners to customers. It also doubles up as his home.
这边房租是1500，现在但空调耗电比较厉害，晚上都基本不开。然后这楼上本来我是住在楼上的，然后但是这夏天楼上太热了。 所以就没住在这上面，就住在下面。一般白天我可能都在那边商场去办公，因为商场有空调嘛。下午天气凉快一点就回来。明天上午应该可以，因为
Money is still tight and customers are demanding.
你跟我聊的时候，正好有个客户交了钱。
你看这其实也没什么，就是上面擦一下就可以了。对。半个小时算100块钱了，便宜的了。
姐，这个真便宜不了，这个就怎么说呢？阿姨毕竟是劳动者。
His dream of ever owning a home now feels further out of reach.
没期待了。 没期待了，现在再去挣一套房子钱，年纪大了，讲实话，现在我出去找个工作，别人都嫌我年纪大，35岁是个坎，你找工作的时候，别人就会戴有色眼镜看你了。
In July, China's banking regulator issued guidance to banks telling them to support project completion, but banks remain reluctant to throw good money after bad. In a policy document, the Chinese government says the responsibility to tackle rotten tail homes lies primarily with local governments. But some question if the local governments have enough resources.
China is unusual in the extent of to which local governments, both provincial and municipal authorities, rely on land sales to finance themselves.
70 out of the top 100 developers has essentially stopped land banking. So land banking revenue has pretty much dropped 30 to 40%, maybe year to date. So you can imagine that the local government financing is being stretched quite sharply.
In Shangtan, where Tian and Li's unfinished apartments stand, the local government is so cash-strapped. 2 bridges it started building 10 years ago still stand unfinished.
I think the only party, the entity that has the resources and the ability to affect market sentiment and consumer confidence is central government. Why they have been relatively passive till now, I don't know.
For many of China's homebuyers caught in the rotten tail limbo, the wait has been long and tortuous. In Guangzhou, this giant lakeside development has been standing unfinished for 25 years, despite rounds of government interventions. Dozens of families have been living here since construction was abandoned. In that time, children have grown up. Working-age men and women have now entered retirement. What was supposed to be landscape gardens, now vegetable plots.
所係業主嚟㗎，你買咗幾耐啊？
好幾年了。 20多年啊？
对。
当时为什么要买这里？
喜欢这里啊。
哦。
有山有水啊。
对，但现在很多都没人住烂尾了，没有觉得有点可惜？
那没有办法，运气不好。
希望的话就有什么希望的话就将来就怎么样？
没有希望，哪有希望现在？
但是在广州找个地方住也挺难的，也蛮贵。现在这里我感觉是世外桃源的感觉哈。
这里像你们不合适，年轻人不合适。
25 years ago, when this development went rotten tail, China accounted for just 3% of the world GDP. Today, its share of the global economy stands at 18%, second only to the US. It isn't just homeowners stuck in limbo who hope for a turnaround.
If the Chinese economy were to stall as a result of this property and debt crisis, it's not just China's problem. It's the world's problem. It's in everybody's interest that China makes this successful transition. It is not just in China's interest.